It was a gray morning. The kind of morning that seems to postpone the beginning of the day, where the light hesitates before spreading fully. The clock on the wall of the house marked the hours slowly, while a woman alone sat in a chair near the window. His gaze was distant, as if he were outside of time, far from anything that could still offer comfort. She no longer had the sparkle in her eyes. There was no longer any reason to smile. The weight of the pain she carried in silence reduced her existence to a void of identical days. She looked out the window without really seeing what was outside. The rain fell in thin curtains of water, obscuring the world outside, as if it wanted to hide everything she still couldn't face. It was a feeling of losing control. Words were no longer enough to express what was happening inside her, and gestures so small seemed to have no meaning anymore. She knew that the world was spinning outside, but to her it seemed like it had stopped a long time ago. Suddenly, a soft, persistent sound broke the silence of the house. It was a simple sound, almost imperceptible, but something about it made her stop and pay attention. A light scratching at the door. She stared without moving, as if the sound were an illusion. But there it was again. The sound, insistent and quiet, like a silent plea. And then, without further thought, she slowly stood up. The door was ajar, as if it had been opened by accident. She didn't know what was waiting on the other side, but as she got closer, she saw it. A dog. His eyes, dark and calm, looked directly at her with a calmness that made her heart beat faster, but without haste. He was there, as if he knew exactly how she felt, but he wasn't forcing her to do anything. It was just there, present, waiting. A simple gesture of life. For a moment she hesitated. The pain, the sadness, the fear of opening herself up again. But something in those eyes made her feel for the first time in a long time that maybe she could trust. Something in their soft but firm energy seemed to whisper that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. Her name was Melissa. Her name seemed almost unrecognizable now, as if it were no longer the same. Before, she had been full of life, always with a smile on her face, a kind word for others, and an unwavering strength. But time, with its constant weight and bitter losses, had taken all that away. She felt as if, over the months, the colors had faded from her life. Each day seemed like a repetition of the last, an endless sequence of empty hours and heavy thoughts. Melissa had lost the love of her life, Lucas, in an accident. He had been her everything, her best friend, her companion, her safe haven. And after his departure, the world seemed to have turned upside down. What she had felt before was now immersed in the chaos of longing. She tried to hold on to the memories, to some little bit of hope, but the memories only seemed to intensify the pain. The emptiness inside her grew, and she wondered if at some point it would go away. She had distanced herself from everyone she loved. Visits became increasingly rare. The house, which had once been overflowing with laughter and shared moments, was now plunged into a cold silence. She didn't know how to get out of that deep hole, or if she still wanted to. She no longer knew what it was like to live without feeling Lucas's presence. Everything seemed so purposeless. The simple act of getting out of bed already seemed like an effort she no longer wanted to make. The pain of mourning was not something that could be overcome quickly, but rather something that dragged on, day after day, like an unbearable shadow. The arrival of the dog, however, marked a turning point, even if she was not aware of it at the time. He was just an unexpected visitor, a silent intruder. But to Melissa, he meant more than anything she could understand at that moment. He was there, unhurried, just being, and that for some reason touched her in a way that nothing else seemed to do. She, who had lost the ability to connect with the people around her, found something in that dog. It wasn't as if he was an instant remedy for her pain, but there was something special about his presence. Something gentle and reliable. He didn't demand anything from Melissa. He didn't pressure her to smile. He didn't expect quick answers. He simply watched her with his deep, dark eyes, and she knew, without knowing why, that he saw her. Melissa didn't understand yet, but in that little being she felt for the first time in a long time the possibility of a genuine connection. It was as if the dog had something in his being that she hadn't lost yet. Something that could still be recovered. Maybe hope. Maybe the will to try to live again. The dog didn't do much to attract attention. He just stood there at Melissa's door, unhurried, as if he knew her time was more precious than any word or gesture. Melissa hesitated for a moment, her eyes gently fixed on him. He was dirty, his fur was disheveled, and his eyes fixed on her with an impressive calm. He was a stray, perhaps, or a stray, but there was something about his presence that seemed so steady, so serene, that it made Melissa feel he wasn't just there by chance. She looked at him with a certain distrust, an uncertainty that came from the depths of her pain. But at the same time, something inside her made her slowly bend down and offer him some food. The dog, without haste, without hesitation, took a step forward and with a smooth movement accepted the gesture without making a sound. He didn't bark, he didn't jump, he didn't expect anything in return. He simply accepted the offer as if he knew that at that moment what Melissa needed most was not words, but a small act of affection. The following days passed slowly. The dog became a constant presence in her life. He appeared every morning somehow, always with the same calm and expectant look, but without demanding anything. Melissa, who used to wake up just to crawl to the sofa, now began to get up a little earlier to wait for him. And when he arrived, she felt something in her chest soften, as if a small crack in her pain had been gently touched. Over time, Melissa noticed something curious. The dog, although he seemed like a simple visitor, had a peculiar way of interacting with her. He didn't look at her like any other animal, but like someone who knew her sadness, as if he knew the weight of her heart. There was a silent harmony between them. The dog, in his stillness, seemed to understand what she couldn't verbalize. He sat by her side, quiet, in no rush to do anything. He was just there, like a calm and constant presence. One day, Melissa noticed that the dog followed her around the house, as if just being close was enough. He didn't need constant attention, but every now and then he would approach her, with a calm look that seemed to say, "I'm here. You don't have to be alone." He never forced, never asked for anything more than a look, a touch. Trust was built quietly, without rushing to change Melissa's world. And little by little, what had once seemed an insignificant presence began to have a deeper meaning. The dog was there for more than companionship. He was there to remind Melissa that even at the bottom of the emotional abyss, there was still something that could be called life. It was as if he were a walking metaphor, a constant reminder that life can return slowly, silently, and unhurriedly. Like him, she didn't need grand gestures to feel that there was something more to live for. Sometimes the simple fact of being seen, of being heard, was enough for the pain to begin to ease. The days continued to pass, now more colorful, but with a gentleness that seemed to have been placed there by the dog himself. Melissa, once a soul lost in the immensity of her pain, now began to wake up to small details that she had neglected for so long. She began to notice the colors of the sky in the morning, the sound of the wind in the trees, the way the light filtered through the windows. The dog had, without words, given her back something that she thought she had lost, the ability to perceive the world around her. However, the changes were not linear, and the pain still made its daily visits. Melissa knew that life would never be the same again. The memories of Lucas, His laughter, his conversations at night, the feeling of his presence still haunted her. Every corner of the house seemed filled with an absence so profound that no matter how hard she tried, she could not escape. But the dog was there, present, silent and unshakable, like an anchor that kept her steady, even when Melissa's internal sea seemed rough. And it was in the silence of that new ritual, the dog's arrival every morning, his peaceful gaze, the simple act of sitting beside him, that Melissa began to realize something new in herself. She didn't need to forget in order to move forward. She didn't need to erase Lucas's memories. What she needed was to learn to live with them in a new, gentler way. The dog, with his unperturbed gaze, seemed to tell him this every day. He didn't pressure her. He didn't force her to be someone else. He accepted her as she was in the totality of her pain. And yet he gave her something new every day. The experience of being alive. Not a life of grand gestures, but a life made of small but profound moments, like the sound of his paws on the cold floor, the comfort of his presence beside her on lonely afternoons. But things weren't always so simple. Melissa still found herself lost in moments of emotional intensity. She tried to focus on the little things, the subtle changes, but the shadows of the past would catch up with her every now and then, like a high tide, and the feeling of helplessness would come back with a vengeance. Sometimes she felt as if she were taking one step forward and two steps back. It was at one of these moments that she truly realized her inner conflict. The dog was not the cure for her pain, but he was in some way a catalyst for change within her. And that in itself made her feel vulnerable. When someone or something starts to offer you a way to move forward, there is always the fear of getting a little further lost along the way, of starting to open your heart again and perhaps suffering even more. But then the dog seemed to understand once again what Melissa couldn't verbalize. He didn't demand that she be strong, nor that she feel good all the time. He was just there, ready to offer what she needed most at that moment. His silent presence, in no rush to change anything, but with the certainty that he would stay by her side, no matter what happened. Melissa began to realize that pain, in its purest form, was just a part of her story, not the end of it. She didn't have to try to fight it all the time. She could just be, feel, and slowly perhaps begin to open herself to the possibility of a new kind of life. And the dog, with his simple, unwavering friendship, helped Melissa realize that even in pain there was a place for healing, even if it was a silent, gradual healing. Their relationship continued to grow, slowly and deeply. Melissa increasingly felt that the dog was becoming more than just a companion. He was becoming a living metaphor, a reflection of what she needed to be for herself. Someone who, despite the scars, could still walk forward with ease and confidence. It was on a gray winter day that Melissa's greatest test came. The dog, always present, suddenly seemed different. He began to move away from her at unusual times, hiding longer under the bed or moving away from her touch. Melissa, who already felt connected to this creature in an inexplicable way, did not understand what was happening. He was no longer coming to her, nor watching her with his usual gaze, the one that always conveyed comfort and silent understanding. In the days that followed, Melissa's uneasiness grew. She tried to call the dog, offer him his favorite food, but he didn't want anything. Something wasn't right. On that particular morning, Melissa was awakened by a faint sound coming from the hallway. The sound of the dog's footsteps. Upon finding him lying on the carpet, he seemed much weaker than before, breathing heavily. Panic took hold of her. She took him to the vet immediately, her heart pounding, her mind filled with questions and fears that she could barely process. The diagnosis was given coldly and directly. The dog had a serious advanced illness, and there was not much the doctors could do. Melissa at first could not believe it. How could she lose him now, when she needed him most? How could she see that silent, loyal soul disappear? In the days that followed, Melissa was plunged into a whirlwind of emotions. The pain of losing her dog, the pain of remembering everything she had been through became stronger and stronger. Every moment with him seemed like an eternity of love and gratitude, and now she had to prepare herself to say goodbye. She remembered how he had helped her out of the abyss of loneliness, how he had soothed her deepest pains with his calm presence. How could she face the future without him? But in that moment of despair, Melissa began to understand something fundamental. The dog had, without words, taught her what she needed to learn, that true healing lay not in finding the absence of pain, but in learning to live with it in a different, kinder, more compassionate way. And now, with loss imminent, she found herself faced with the last lesson he could offer. She sat beside him, stroking his head one last time, and her tears began to fall, not just from the pain of loss, but from everything he represented. Not just the foundation of her recovery, but also the very essence of the ability to love again, even when the fear of pain overwhelmed her. In the last weeks of the dog's life, Melissa made a decision. She knew she couldn't hold him forever, but she could at least be fully present. They spent the afternoons together in silence, but a comfortable silence, a silence that more than ever meant everything. The dog, in that vulnerable state, still had the power to teach her about the beauty of surrender. She knew that by letting him go, she was completing a cycle of love and growth. The pain would be great, but the gratitude would also be immense. When the dog was finally gone, Melissa's heart was broken but not destroyed. The loss of a loved one, of a deep friendship, would never be easy. But she knew that what he left behind was not just pain, but a transformation that would allow her to move forward. The love he gave her, without words, without demands, without haste, would remain with her forever. Time followed its course, as it always does, relentless and silent. Melissa, now more serene, walked through life with a new weight on her heart. There was pain, of course, but also a deeper understanding of herself, of life, and of her place in it. The dog who had been her refuge for so long was gone, but the lessons he had left behind continued to echo in her soul. In the early days after his death, Melissa felt as if she were trying to make sense of a new world, one in which he was no longer by her side, with his gentle paws and watchful gaze. But as time passed, she realized something extraordinary. He was still there somehow, not in his body, but in everything he represented. In every step she took, he was there. In the silent memories, in the subtle gratitude she carried, and most importantly, in the transformation he had wrought in her. He had not just been a companion. He had shaped her, helped her see the world through different eyes. Melissa now understood that he had prepared her for life's difficult moments, for loss, for grief, for change. Melissa began to dedicate her time to helping others, those who, like her, needed a helping hand to get through dark times. She adopted other dogs, all with their own stories, their own pain, their own marks of abandonment. But she was no longer just caring for them, she was learning from them. Each one brought with them a lesson, a way to love and be loved without fear. She gave them what she herself had received, a new beginning, a new chance. But the greatest learning of all didn't come from a specific dog or a single situation. It was the understanding that life was not about avoiding pain, but about getting through it. She learned that pain, no matter how painful, was part of the journey, and that overcoming it didn't mean moving on without it, but learning to live with it, allowing herself to grow from the experience. One late afternoon, as the sky turned orange and pink, Melissa sat on the garden bench, the same bench where she had cried so much, where she had felt lost, as if there was no reason to go on. Now, with the wind caressing her face and the new dogs around her, she felt at peace. There was no longer the constant anguish of loss, but rather the calm acceptance that everything in life has its time. The dog, her loyal friend, her sole companion, would always be with her no matter where she was. Melissa looked at the horizon, at the place where the sun touched the sky. She smiled, her expression peaceful, knowing that somehow he was there, still by her side as he had always been. Silent, loyal, teaching, loving, the dog had taught her something valuable, that scars are not flaws but marks where light can enter. And so, Melissa continued to live her life, with more courage and more love than she ever imagined possible. Because somewhere deep in her heart she knew that life, like love, always finds a way. And that, as challenging as it was, she was no longer alone. The story of Melissa and her dog was not just a story of pain and loss, but of healing, transformation, and proof that in every ending there is also a new beginning. And that in every gesture of love, no matter how small, there is a force capable of transforming everything around it. And so, with one last look at the dogs that now accompanied her, Melissa got up from the bench, took a deep breath, and moved on. No longer with the weight of loss, but with the lightness of love that never goes away. If this story touched your heart, just imagine how many more are still to come. Here, every bark carries a new beginning, a second chance, a brand new life. If you believe in the power of dogs to change destinies, like mine, like yours, then subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because together we'll share stories the world needs to hear and feel.